Gittin Daf Yomi Gittin, difficult conversation. Sefer Teiruchin, Ve'ageret, Shivukин, Ve'get Pturim. We get into the actual wording of the get, the actual formulation of the get today, right at the end of the parak, after we've discussed the concepts of the get and what it all means. But more than that, the Masechta of Gittin teaches us how to have difficult conversations. What more difficult a conversation could there be than the conversation between a husband and wife at the termination of their marriage? And managers and leaders have to have difficult conversations, and they usually mess them up terribly, because they're one of the hardest things for a manager and a leader to do, particularly when that conversation involves a termination and you feel you're destroying another person's life. It's terribly, terribly difficult. And in the current environment, this is something that's happening a lot. And one of the mistakes we tend to make is to sugarcoat and to be diplomatic. And yet you want to be diplomatic. But if you're diplomatic, do you cause confusion? Do you obscure the real meaning of what you're trying to say? Is the person left unclear? How do you balance the need to be very clear and the need to be diplomatic? Just the other day here in Ranana, somebody had to have a difficult conversation resulting in a termination, and we talked about the fact that this is the Masechta. Gittin teaches this, how to have these conversations, and today we see that perhaps more than anything, as the wording of the get really summarizes a lot of what we've been talking about. The Mishnah at the bottom of Pei Amud Aleph says, "Gufo shel get hareyat muteret l'chol adam." The real essence of the language of the get is to say to the woman in the get, you are permitted to marry whoever you want. Rabbi Yehuda says you've got to add these words: "V'dan devi lechi minai sefer Teiruchin ve'ageret Shivukin ve'get Pturin." This is a book, a sefer of Teiruchin, of separation, ve'ageret Shivukin, and a letter of leaving you, ve'get Pturin, and a document entitling you to be free, is what the Rabbi Yehuda says has to be added into that. We see a lot of the things we've been talking about for the last couple of months crystallized in the wording of the get itself. For example, the Rambam says, Sefer Kritut davar hakoret beino leveina shelo yisha'el lo alei reshut. What is the meaning of Sefer Kritut? That he has no further authority over her. You remember we talked about that, why it's v'natan biyada, the idea of a matana, you're giving her something, you're giving her independence. To do that, you've got to remove your authority. You can't give somebody freedom, you can't empower somebody and retain some kind of control. If you're empowering somebody, you've got to pull back, no control. And if there isn't a complete separation of authority, then she's not divorced. And there's got to be the shilcha, I am sending you out. Not that I'm sending myself away. And we'll often do that in these difficult conversations. Not your problem, not your fault. I just have to go and do my own thing. I need space. I need to go. That's not a get. A get is you need to go. And that's very hard to say, but the halacha forces the husband to say that. Because if you're not willing to say that, then what kind of a divorce is this? You've got to confront what you're actually doing. No, it's not your problem. It's really my, when guys and girls break up often, it's not your problem. Nothing wrong with you. It's my problem. I've got to sort myself out. That's so weak. No, I'm actually asking you to go. That's what I'm doing. And that's a horrible thing, I know, but a get is a horrible thing. But that's what I'm doing. I'm asking you to go. Says the Rambam, if that's not clear, it's not a get. The Shulchan Aruch adds, Na'agu lichtov Teiruchin, Shvukin, Piturin. The minhag is to include in the wording of the get those three ideas. Teiruchin, Shvukin, and Piturim comes from our Mishnah here on Daf Amud Beis, says the Shulchan Aruch. And the Levush brings the nusach of the get, and I've included it, the whole nusach of the get, the 12 rows of the get, both in the Aramaic as we write it today, and with a Hebrew translation. But what's interesting in the Levush's nusach, which is the nusach we use today, the Levush was from the time of the Ramah. He was a contemporary of the Ramah and the Marshal, and he was a Talmud of the Marshal and the Marshal. So he's at the time of the Shulchan Aruch, of the formulation of the Shulchan Aruch. The Levush is very, very important. He learned from the Marshal and the Ramah in a town called Charkov. Charkov is now in the news. It's at the front line of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. So when people see Charkov, they think Russian-Ukrainian conflict. When I see Charkov, I think Marshal. That's where the Marshal was. That's where the Levush was learning from the Marshal. It was a big cultural center, and the Levush was a philosopher, and he was an astronomer, and he was a mathematician, and he was a physicist. in addition to being an unbelievable Talmudist, much to the chagrin of his Rebbe, the Marshal, who believed that we shouldn't waste any time on secular studies. But the Levush was outstanding, and we'll see, nevertheless, what kind of Yerushalayim he had. Anyway, the Levush brings us the whole Lashon Haget, and the strange thing about it is these words that the Shulchan Aruch says you have to include, Teiruchin, Shvukin, and Piturin, are included in the get 3 times, but in different sequences. And the Levush explains the reason for the different sequences. The Levush, he wrote 10 Sforim called Levush. The Levush Mordechai, Levush this, Levush it's Mordechai Yafeh. And he wrote the Sefer called the Levush, an unbelievable Sefer on Shulchan Aruch, and on many other things he wrote as well. The reason he wrote these 10 Levushim, he writes in his Akdoma, in his introduction, he says he wrote them because in Bereshit, when it says after the Chet, Hashem, Vayalbesh otam kutnot or, Hashem made uniforms of leather, of or, for Adam and Chava. That's or with an ayin, but the Medrash says you can also read or with an aleph, and the Rebbeinu Shalom dressed them in clothing of Torah. And that's why the Levush writes in the Hakdama, he called this the Levush. It's the Torah clothing that gives us our sense of presence and aura. Clothing is a very important part of the way we present ourselves, of the way people experience ourselves. And people should experience our Torah. They should feel the Torah on us. They should see the Torah on us. And like a Levush, like clothing. But there's an amazing Chofetz Chaim, and I've included it here. By the way, for those who are able to learn from texts, as valuable as I hope the Matmonim Shiurim are to the people who are listening to it and following, and to you who are here, the source sheets are the real treasure. The curation, what I include and what I don't include, is so important to see why. Why is this included? Why is that included? What is important about it? And here I decided to include a piece of Chofetz Chaim from the Nidchei Yisrael. The Nidchei Yisrael is one of many Sforim that Chofetz Chaim wrote. He was enormously prolific, not just the Mishnah Brura and the Sefer Chofetz Chaim and the Shmiras Haloshon. He wrote many other Sforim. One of them is Nidchei Yisrael, a specific Sefer written for Jews who live far away from Yiddishkeit, who live in overseas in different countries, and they're not near Rabbonim and they're not near yeshivas. What is the minimum they need to do just to stay on track? The Sefer Nidchei Yisrael, every Jew today, every Jew should learn it. But certainly Jews who are living in distant places, little towns around the world, all the Chabad shlichim should all learn Nidchei Yisrael. That's the minimum of what you need to know. And he writes in Perek Chav Gimel about how you have to resist temptation, and things come your way, and you've got to be able to resist temptation. Writes about Yosef and so on, and Ruth and Boaz and so on. And he writes on the second column, 7 lines from the top, V'nimtza bisfarim ala gaon bal halevush. It's mentioned in the Sforim a story about the Levush, this person who we're learning. Zacha min hashamayim la'asot hachiburim hanichmadim shelo. He had amazing siyata dishmaya in writing these unbelievable Sforim, the Levush. V'hem sifrei halevushim shepa'am achat b'imei bachruto, because once when he was a young man, haya lo nisayon gadol, he had an enormous trial and tribulation. Sheba itzel duchasit achat lischol schora. He was very good looking, he was very handsome, and there was a princess, there was a governor's daughter, a noblewoman, who started getting friendly with him and trying to do business with him and encouraging relationships with him. She invites him to her home and tries to seduce him, like a Yosef story. He had no way to get away. She locked the door, she had the guards watching out, she wouldn't let him out until he was with her. He was able to escape through the toilet system, through the sewage system. He was able to get out of the house to avoid having a relationship with her. So he excused himself, said, "Excuse me, I just need to go to the bathroom." And he never came out of the bathroom. He found a way through the sewage system to get out. And he disgraced himself that way. And he fled. And he was wearing a whole lot of clothes. And they became disgusting, and they all got dirty. And that's why he was zocher to be able to write the levushim, the clothings. So how does this tie up with the levush's own comment in his own hakdama? So I think what the levush is saying is, yes, my clothes got disgustingly dirty when I escaped from this woman, but it wasn't just my physical clothes. It was the kutnot or. My Torah also got damaged by just having been put in that situation with this woman. And in order to correct the damage to his Torah, he wrote the Sefer HaLevush. So that's who the Levush is. People might look at him and say, yes, he went to university, he was a scientist, he was this. He's like a modern Orthodox Jew. Yeah, some modern Orthodox Jew. How many modern Orthodox Jews would escape through the sewage system to avoid an Avera with a beautiful woman? But that's what the Levush did. And this piece of Chofetz Chaim, just in passing, is just a little precious gem of history and Musar that we need to know. Anyway, what the Levush does do, and I've quoted the Levush in full virtually in this section on the Shulchan Aruch in Even Oezer, he explains basically that the first time we write these three Lashonot, V'shavkit, Ufatrit, V'truchit, we write them in an order that is kind of gentle. V'shavkit, he says, means I'm leaving you. That's the first thing. You start off with Shavkit Targum Shel Azavti. Shavkit is the Aramaic for I'm leaving you. And then you say Ufat Fatartit. And that's a little further, because that means we don't have a connection anymore. I have no authority over you anymore. So I'm leaving you, but I'm not going away on leave. I'm not taking a few months off. This is it. You're on your own. And then he says, V'teruchit. I'm actually asking you to leave. I'm expelling you from the home. I'm asking you to go, which is so hard. So he does it gently, he does it diplomatically. In a way that is similar, I bring the Rashi at the bottom when the Rebbeinu Shem says to Avraham Avinu, Bincha Yechidcha. So he starts off, and he says firstly, Avraham says, okay, I've got to take my son to sacrifice my son. Maybe he means Yishmael. No, Yechidcha. He says, yeah, but Yishmael is also an only son to his mother. Asher Ahavta. I love both of them. And then at the end, the Rebbeinu Shem is very clear. At Yitzchak, I'm talking about Yitzchak. By that time, explains Rashi in the Medrash, by that time, Avraham has had a few moments to get used to this terrible idea. And in the same way, the way that the Levush explains this, V'shavkit, V'fatrit, V'teruchit, it's just a gentle diplomatic way of saying, we're splitting up, you're on your own, you need to leave now. And so there's just a general movement through the messaging. But at the end, it's the other way around. You say it in the 11th line of the get, Sefer Teiruchin, Ve'ageret Shevukin, Ve'get Pturin. It's the other way around. You start, this is a divorce, you've got to leave. And it's an Igeret, and he talks about why it's Sefer, and why it's an Igeret, and why it's a get. And then Get Pturin at the end. You can marry whoever you want. Because he says at the end, you've got to be very clear. What is this? This is a get. This is not a separation. This is not a taking time apart. This is a get. And you've got to be very clear. And we see here the framework for these difficult conversations. Yes, you've got to do them gently. And you've got to take the person through the passage. We've reached a point in our relationship. You might be talking to an employee that you've got to let go. We've reached a situation in our business, in our team, where the work that you've been doing is no longer necessary, unfortunately, so we've got to think a little differently. I've looked at various possibilities, tried this, tried that, none of these things are going to work. I'm afraid we're going to have to terminate. That just gives him a few seconds to get used to the ideas that when the thunderbolt comes, he's got it, he's already there. But at the end, you've got to summarize and make it very clear. So what I'm saying is, it's over. From now, you need to leave today, and I wish you well. You've got to leave the person with clarity. The journey you take them through is diplomatic. The end message has to be clear. The kindest thing you can do to the person is not to be obscure, is not to be confusing, is not to be sugarcoating where the person doesn't know quite what happens. There are many managers who have difficult performance conversations with employees. And I've said to the manager, what did you tell the employees? I said, I've told the employee his performance is not up to standard. If he doesn't improve, he has to go. I say to the employee, what did your manager tell you? My manager said he would like to see some improvement. He's very happy with me, but he would like to see some improvement. They're not saying and hearing the same thing at all, because the manager's so careful to say it in a nice diplomatic way that it just confuses the employee. So yes, you can be diplomatic as you unpack the issue. Give the person a chance to unpack it step by step. But at the end of the conversation, there can be no ambiguity. You've got to summarize the conversation with absolute clarity. And you should know that this is from me as Sefer Teiruchin. This is a get. It's a divorce. You have to leave this house. Ve'ageret Shevukin. And I have no further authority over you. Veget pturin, and you're free to marry whoever you want. But to be absolutely clear that that's what it is that we're saying. And here we see, if you have a chance to go through the Levush, it's very, very beautiful, and to understand how to package a difficult message, how to have a difficult conversation, how to take somebody through a process of experience and yet leave them at the end of it with absolute clarity and no ambiguity about what the outcome of the conversation is.